As France was falling against Germany, Italy declares war against France in June of 1940. Mussolini coveted the Nice and Savoy regions of France, as well as Tunisia and Djibouti in Africa. The Italians from their base in Libya went 60 miles into Egypt. General Graziani of Italy had 200,000 men, whereas the British General Wavell only had 60,000 in Egypt and all of Palestine. Wavell just planned a small raid at Sidi Barrani. However, Lieutenant General Sir Richard O'Connor unexpectedly routed the Italians, and they decided to invade Libya. O'Connor took a shortcut through the desert terrain and trapped the Italians. Graziani surrendered. The British could have easily taken all of Libya, but Churchill withdrew troops to fight in Greece. This would be a major mistake. The British could not have withheld the strike against the Germans as they were invading Greece. Thus, he took critical British troops away from the North African campaign. About the same time, General Erwin Rommel was sent to Libya. The best British troops were withdrawn, and Rommel smashed through the British lines. O'Connor was captured by the Italians and the Germans. In mid-1941, the British increased their strength and fought Rommel back. This is at the same time that the Germans are invading the Soviet Union, thus they don't have the spare forces to assist Rommel. The British were just about to have another victory against the Germans and the Italians, but Commonwealth forces withdrew because of the Japanese attacks in Southeast Asia around Vietnam and Australia. Again, Rommel goes forward. At the bottom center of the map, you can see the country of Libya, which was a colony of Italy. The Italians first tried to attack Egypt. They wanted to gain the Suez Canal, plus go into the very rich oil-laden Middle East. Their attack failed. The British pushed them back. However, as the British were attempting to take all of Libya, Churchill orders key British formations to be diverted to Greece against the German attack. Rommel is sent by the Germans into Libya. He pushes the British back. Eventually, the British reinforce, and it's a seesaw that goes back and forth. The climax of the Eastern Theater of North Africa occurs at El Alamein, Egypt. The first battle occurred in August of 1942. General Erwin Rommel battles General Bernard Montgomery of the British between the Alamein, Katara, and Montgomery held. In the second battle in October of 1942, Montgomery now had 200,000 troops with more tanks and planes. He went on an offensive and would eventually capture Tripoli on January 3, 1943. El Alamein would be one of the four major turning points of the war, and it is important to understand that in November of 1942, the Americans and the British invaded French Northwest Africa. Thus, Rommel and the Italians were in a pincher point. As I had stated, El Alamein, Egypt, in October of 1942 was one of the key turning points of World War II, meaning that the Germans and their allies would no longer be on the offensive, they would be pushed on the defensive. The other key turning point that we will be talking about in this lesson is the Battle of Stalingrad, and we had already mentioned Guadalcanal and increased American war production. On the left, you can see El Alamein on the coast of northern Egypt. In October, Montgomery goes on an offensive and easily starts pushing the Italians and the Germans back. They would capture Tripoli, Libya in January of 1943, and you can see the arrows where the Americans and the British invaded French Morocco and Algeria, and eventually pushed the Germans and the Italians out of Africa by May of 1943. We will discuss Operation Torch in the future. During the winter of 1941, the Soviets held off the German invasion of Moscow and Leningrad in the north. However, there was a contingency that if Moscow would fall, Stalin would retreat to Samara on the Volga River. This is where he had his bunker. Notice Samara is about 600 miles to the southwest of Moscow. These are pictures inside Stalin's bunker. It's in an apartment building, and it was actually just rediscovered about 20 years ago. It is 6 stories underground. This is a picture of the desk that Stalin would have used in this bunker. He never had to use this bunker during World War II. However, it was there in case he would need it. This is another picture, and this is 6 floors below ground. The Soviets kept the bulk of their army in and around Moscow, fearing that Hitler would launch another attack in 1942. However, Hitler realized he did not have the forces necessary, so he decided to keep going against economic targets in the south. They made impressive gains in June and July. However, Hitler makes a mistake and divides the German army in the south into 2 camps. As they are racing across the Ukraine and they cross the Don River to the right, Army Group A would head to the south to the Caucasus Mountains. This is where the Soviet Union had a lot of its oil production. Another army would guard its flank, but then also try to attack Stalingrad on the Volga River. Hitler wanted this city primarily because it was Stalin's city, named after him. And by controlling the Volga River, this was key to Russian industry. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus's 6th Army was to capture Stalingrad. This would solidify a line from the Don Volga to the Caucasus Mountains. Hitler wanted to capture Stalin's city. On September 12, 1942, German troops entered Stalingrad, and Stalin decided to reinforce his forces there. By the 30th of September, the Germans controlled 2/3 of the city. Hitler would give a speech and state that Stalingrad was ready to fall. However, the Soviets had been husbanding their forces north of Stalingrad and also behind the Volga River. Attacks from the Soviets from the north and the south, plus fresh reinforcements in the city, brought Paulus to a halt. Paulus would be reinforced by the Germans, and the Romanian 3rd and 4th armies took over to the south of Stalingrad. The Soviets counterattacked on November 19th, and the Romanian armies were shattered. They encircled Paulus's army by linking up on November 23rd, 45 miles west of Stalingrad. Paulus became surrounded and asked Hitler to break out with his 20 divisions, 6 of them Panzer tanks units, with his 250,000 men. Hitler declined, and Goering pledged he could supply Paulus by the air. The Germans attempted a counterattack, but could not reach the city. On December 23rd, Paulus was advised to break out. However, he was short of fuel and ammunition. Goering could only supply 90 tons of material per day. The Germans are split in Stalingrad into 2 pockets. On January 22nd, Paulus loses the last airfield, and by January 29th, he surrenders, and the other pockets of German troops surrender on February 2nd. All in all, 200,000 Germans surrender, and only 30,000 were evacuated by the air. Stalingrad is renamed to Volgograd today. This building is a memorial to the destruction of Stalingrad that still exists today. Here's another viewpoint of that same building. One of the most impressive war memorials that I've ever experienced is in Volgograd or Stalingrad. This is at least a mile-long walk. You go up a series of steps and you see these relief statues built into the side of the wall on both sides. This is the statue of Mother Russia. Again, it is a mile away from actually going to view this. This is what you are seeing as you're walking up through those steps. When you get to the top of the summit, this is their tomb of the unknown soldier. Here you can see Russian troops goose-stepping to march from the tomb of the unknown soldier, and then they are going to encircle and go out of this round building and go march to the statue of Mother Russia. Notice at the bottom of the statue the size of a person. This is how large the statue is. It is twice as high as the Statue of Liberty.